You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. The college football season ended, and as is customary, ESPN and everybody else puts out their way too early top 25. And obviously, it has never become more irrelevant or less relevant, whichever way you want to say it, to put out a way too early top 25 at the end of the college football season because of the portal. Your roster, even at the end of the regular season, consider at the end of the regular season or the end of the championship, when Michigan won the national championship a little more than a month ago, Jim Harbaugh was still the coach at Michigan. Nick Saban was still the coach at Alabama. Caleb Downs was the safety at Alabama. Quinshon Judkins was the running back at Ole Miss. All of those things are different now. Kalen DeBoer was the coach at Washington. All of those things are different. So, I mean, 3 of the playoff teams have new head coaches now. So I understand the exercise and why it can be fun. It's also not worth literally anything what someone's subjective opinion is at the end of the regular season or now. It is just interesting, I think, sometimes to look at a way too early top 25 just to see kind of what what the narrative is or might be surrounding a team or teams. And no change with Georgia there at the top. They're still number 1 in the way too early top 25, and I guess I understand that. I mean, Georgia was roundly considered the best team in college football this past season. And they got tripped, man. They got tripped by Alabama in the SEC championship game, a team that played better than they did that day, and they lost, and it cost them their shot. And it's quite honestly, if we were looking at a 12 or 16 team playoff, Georgia would have been in it last year and still would have been favored despite losing the SEC championship game. The first biggest change is at number 2, where we find Ohio State. Ohio State previously was 5 in these rankings, now all the way up to 2, and it makes sense. There was a big question about quarterback, right? Well, Kyle McCord is gone. Will Howard from Kansas State comes in, although I have questions about Will Howard and his ability. But not only is Will Howard there at quarterback, Quinshon Judkins is coming at running back. Chip Kelly is now the offensive coordinator. So you got Judkins and Travion Henderson. Emeka Ibuka is back at wide receiver. And then, of course, they added a guy like Caleb Downs in the transfer portal, which is massively significant. I mean, you could tell nothing has motivated Ohio State more than seeing Michigan win the national championship, and they're all in there too. Oregon was 3 before; they're still 3, and then Texas drops from 4 to number 2. I don't know necessarily why. Maybe some of the draft. The players they lost the draft, like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, they did get Isaiah Bond from Alabama. So that's interesting why Texas would have dropped. Maybe it's not necessarily anything Texas did, more so just an attaboy and a hat tip to Ohio State, which deserves to go up. The other really big jump, which was surprising to me, was Notre Dame from 10 all the way to 5. I'm not so sure. And yes, Mike Denbrock is added as the offensive coordinator, but Riley Leonard comes in at quarterback. So Sam Hartman from Wake Forest was the quarterback last year, as we remember, and he's gone to the draft. And now Riley Leonard from Duke comes in, but I don't know. They've added a Chris Mitchell from FIU, Bo Collins, a receiver from Clemson. But man, you're replacing both of your tackles in Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. I just don't know that I understand why Notre Dame made that big leap, unless it was more other teams maybe regressing. Surely the addition of Riley Leonard to replace Sam Hartman alone isn't what would cause that leap. And I don't know that they're giving the addition of Mike Denbrock. I mean, they did mention it in the write-up ESPN did, but I don't know that alone is the thing that would cause you to go from 10 to 5. Ole Miss up a spot from 7 to 6. And I don't know that there was any team that had more success in the portal than Ole Miss. Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle from Texas A&M. Princely Umamialen from Florida. I probably butchered that, but he's the edge from Florida that everybody knows. Chris Paul Jr., the linebacker from Arkansas. There, again, was probably not a more successful portal season than either Ole Miss or Ohio State this offseason. So Ole Miss there at 6 makes a lot of sense, and I don't think that's going to change. So if you're an LSU fan and you're looking at Ole Miss, you got to be prepared to see that because you're going to see Ole Miss in everybody's top 10. They may bump up on the top 5, and they're going to be projected by a lot of people to be in the playoff. And quite honestly, when you look at what they have back against their schedule, we talk about every year when I talk about preseason projections, I look at two things. Who has the fewest questions against the most manageable schedule? And Ole Miss has a ton returning against one of the easiest schedules in the SEC. So, yes, they should be there. Now, and I would expect Ole Miss to be in a 12-team playoff. If they're not, that's a massive disappointment. And if they come up short, which I suspect they will once they get into the playoff, I think Ole Miss people will be really disappointed. I think Lane Kiffin leaves. I think it'd be very Ole Miss's offseason after 24, I think is going to look a lot like Michigan. A lot like Michigan, where it was your shot. You had all that veteran talent, and you're going to see this massive exodus after next season, and it's probably the time for Lane Kiffin to go as well. I mean, this feels like an all-in year for Ole Miss. The rest of the top 10, Missouri, coming off an 11-win season, is at number 7. Penn State up from 12 to 8. That's interesting. Alabama is the big faller, right? Alabama was 4. They drop all the way to 9, and for obvious reasons. Nick Saban's gone. Kalen DeBoer's in. You lose 33 players to the transfer portal. Alabama taking a big step back is to be expected. And then Utah up from 13 to 10, rounding out the top 10. Cam Rising returning for another season in college football, and Utah going to the Big 12. Remember, going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12 this year. That's another thing we got to remember. You're going to have Colorado and Utah and Arizona State going to the Big 12. So it's going to be a new-look schedule for those teams as well. The other two that you might be interested in, Michigan, the national champion who was 6. Of course, Jim Harbaugh leaving. Sharon Moore in as head coach, but just an excess of talent. Michigan in the way too early top 25 was 6. They're down to 13. And that makes a lot of sense. A first-year head coach, the massive exodus of your talent. You're losing McCarthy and Blake Corum and more than half of your starters on both sides of the ball. LSU is one spot ahead of Michigan at 12, and they were 14 in the way too early top 25. But I think seeing Garrett Nussmeier in the bowl game, where he was the MVP of the ReliaQuest, adding C.J. Daniels, Xavion Thomas at receiver, that's not a what and what now, replacing Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, who are both projected first-round picks. But also doing what you did in the portal, adding Jair Brown at corner, adding Jordan Gilbert at safety. Yes, Austin Osbury as well. I don't know that Austin Osbury factors in as a starter immediately. Jordan Gilbert should be a day one starter at safety for LSU. But you lose Jaden, Malik, Brian Thomas, Mike Denbrock. You lose a giant core of your offensive production. We know that. LSU's somewhere in the middle of the pack nationally as far as returning production next season. But even with that, a veteran quarterback, a really good head coach, your entire offensive line back, 4 of your 5 starters on the offensive line, a lot of your offensive production, and a defense that can't possibly be worse, has LSU up from 14 to 12. The rest of the SEC, Oklahoma is at 14, Tennessee 16. Just if you're wondering, Clemson down at 19 because they just absolutely refuse to adapt. Kentucky in the way too early top 25. They went from unranked to 23. And then the other interesting one is Texas A&M at number 25. They were previously not in the way too early top 25, but they're here at 25 now. And I think this is the first time in a handful of years that nationally people aren't going to take the Texas A&M bait. It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, yeah, that's just not going to happen. So A&M 7-6 a year ago, they fired Jimbo. You bring in Mike Elko. You do have a nice amount of talent back on both sides of the ball. Connor Wegman coming back off an injury, but that feels about right for A&M. You want to put him in there at 25 or receiving votes. That feels about right for Texas A&M. But the benefit of the doubt that they continued to get without winning anything is what annoyed a lot of people and was head scratching. It's why if you're a gambler, playing A&M unders on win totals made sense because they were overhyped because of recruiting classes. and they never were able to maximize that talent. They lost a lot of that talent, and you saw a big exodus of it this year as well. But so much of it will be scheduled and what Mike Elko can do turning around that culture there in College Station as well. So ESPN took a stab at reworking their way too early top 25. LSU up to number 12. The change at the top, Bama fell all the way to 9. Ohio State up to 2, as you might expect. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.